This is the Daily Tech News for Thursday, March 27th, 2025. We tell you what you need to know, follow up on the context of those stories, and help each other understand.
Today, we hear from Tom Merritt about wires, and we reach into the mailbox for something from you.
Yeah, that's right. Good to hear from Tom for a change. I'm Jason Howell.
Yeah, that Tom Merritt. I'm Huyen Dow.
Let's start with what you need to know with the big story. And I got to say, when I saw this story, I was like, oh my goodness, this has to be the big story. It's perfect for the two of us. We do a podcast on Android called Android Faithful, of course, with DTNS. And this falls right in line. This is actually a pretty interesting story to knock around. Google announced a major change to how it develops the Android operating system. Beginning next week, all Android development will be moved to Google's internal branches and away from the public AOSP, which stands for Android Open Source Project, Garrett. So the shift is intended to streamline the development process and minimize the kinds of complications that can occur within the maintenance of two separate branches. You've got the public AOSP branch, and then you've got Google's internal branch. Maintaining those two separate, one of them being public, one of them being not so public, can pose a lot of problems. This is meant to address that. Google has confirmed its commitment to keeping Android open source by publishing new Android releases and the Android Linux kernel fork publicly. The company does plan to reduce its frequency in publishing that source code, though. They're moving from an ongoing public development model to releasing the code only when there's a new branch that has those changes integrated. And that's what they would go ahead and publish, just at that moment. So less updates going out to the public as a result as well. Google has a more formal announcement, supposedly, of this change that is expected to drop later this week. So we might find out a little bit more about this. But, I often say on Android Faithful, because it's true, I'm not a developer. This isn't the sort of thing that I'm probably as a user, going to see the impacts of. I imagine most users probably wouldn't even know that this happened. If you're just using Android, you're probably not going to see or feel the impacts. You, I don't need to tell you, you are a developer. You already know this. What do you think from the developer perspective? Because you're working a little bit closer to kind of the impacts of a change like this, or does it not impact your work much at all?
That's a great question. So I think just like everything else, it depends on the kind of developer you are and where you work. So I kind of wanted to clarify a few things too, is that there were parts of Android OS that were already developed in private. And when we say private, just like kind of internally to Google. And I also kind of, along with that, kind of want to talk about the whole open source phrase, right? So open source, I think in the simplest definition means a company will publish the source code for their product. So in this case, Android, right? But there's also, I think, an entire community, a kind of even philosophy around open source software where things are developed in the open, where you can see each change, all the discussions that go in as they go in. And I think that something that we love, and I know, I think both of us and many Android faithful fans love, is it has been like the traditional openness of Android. There was transparency there. So I think, to be fair, it's not that not that Android will be closed source. It is still open source. But if you are a person that truly believes in the philosophy of open source with open development and transparency at all steps, this is bad, or this is worse. It's Android becoming it's a change. It's Android becoming less open. So there there were parts, and it's hard because Android is not just like a single repo. It's a lot of different things. It's it's hard to define what Android is, right? There's like the internal OS itself. There's things like, I think, Bluetooth and some other kind of smaller systems that there were their own repos, their own little kind of like code stores. And so some of these things were publicly developed, like out in the open on AOSP. Some things were always internal. For something like myself, as a developer, as like an app developer, I work on, like apps that normal people use. The things that I care most about are the tools that I use specifically. I don't really muck in the OS itself. I work on kind of like more the application layer level, and that's this thing called Android X. That is in the open. And actually, as I understand it, listening to some chatter on the grapevine from folks at Google and other developers, that actually will continue to be in the open. That is a truly open source project. So I think I think the impact of this depends on who you are as a developer, who you are as someone who interacts with Android, but also like your perception or your ideal on what open source should be. So I think the biggest impact of this change will be on folks that are not part of Google, that do not have some partnership that involves GMS. So companies like Samsung and things like that have partnerships with Google directly. They still get access to the internal branch because they, make their own flavors and they're part of like, the Android like ecosystem and the Android partnership. So if you're a person who's third party, you don't have any of these partnerships and you want to contribute to AOSP, Garrett, you will not be able to do that anymore, I believe. And that does suck because that is genuinely taking away another part of the Android openness identity. And that's not a lot of people, to be fair. I mean, like, and I give a lot of credit to people that do, because this is like, very complex. This is OS level code. It's not everybody. It's not, I mean, I've never done it. I don't know anyone personally. I know a couple people, but I think the vast majority of Android developers that I know have never done this, but there are people that do, and they make valuable contributions and they care a lot about AOSP. So this is definitely a lose for them. And I think generally a lose for the Android community in general, right? Just because this is the identity of Android, right? Openness and transparency.
You mentioned perception. That was something that kind of came up for me is like, some people are reacting to this with the knee-jerk reaction of, oh, Google's going closed source with Android after all this time. Yeah. Like you said, it's not really a closing of the source. It's just a reframing or a reshuffling of how they approach their open source strategy. But as we know, perception is often reality. And Google's done something similar with Google Chrome, kind of taking pieces that were once open and taking them more in-house and kind of closing them off with extensions and different aspects. And so, is that perception is reality, a bad influence on Google as a whole? And another thing that I'll just say real quick is, this might be good for Google from the perspective of making it easier for them to maintain their code and do all this stuff. No question that will be much, that will make things easier for Google. It might also have the effect of controlling some of the leaks and controlling some of the features and giving Google a little bit of extra surprise to have in their pocket for the future. Because as you and I both know, we know people who have built their careers out of analyzing AOSP code and looking for clues for future features, even devices. And so this could be, if not a reason for that, it could be a nice byproduct for Google as well.
Yeah, I think that was some of the opinions that I saw was that, in the article that our colleague Michelle Ramon wrote, he mentioned something called merge conflicts. That's usually when you try to basically merge in a bunch of new code with old code. And a lot of times if the changes are complex enough or they change things enough, you cannot just automatically stick the old code on top of the new code. You have to go through sometimes line by line and resolve those conflicts. And so I can't imagine. I do that. We all do that every day. I can't imagine doing that for something the size of AOSP. And so what I've heard on the grapevine is that because this process is not easy, it does actually have to be done by humans a lot of times. Sometimes they might even have leaked internal code. I don't know if that's, I don't have any specific examples. That's just buzz I hear. But to your point, that's probably not in regards to the product, the business side of Android, a quote, good thing. I think that's fair. And it seems like this might be a surprise to some people. This might feel like a shock, but it seems to go along with what we've seen in the last year with Google merging the hardware and Android teams and trying to,
and a lot of changes right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, you can see the focus on the business side, and whether you think that's at the cost of or prioritizing it over the Android open side is, we can debate that, but I can't help but see it. Like this is exactly that same, this is that move, that this is an extension of that going down to the code. And sure, like I think as you said, I think it will definitely make certain things easier, but then at what cost? And like, I guess, what do we all think about it and how do we feel about it? Yeah. The perception is not great, I think, across the board. Even if it has merit, it's not great.
Yeah, this is part of Google's own Doge, Department of Google Efficiency. I think that's what we're seeing here. All right.
Goodness.
Had to get that in there.
I like it. Okay. Well, with that, DTNS is made possible by you, the listener, thanks to Paul Boyer, Dee Lacer, Brad, and Daniel Elswick.
Yeah, y'all are awesome. You know you're awesome because you're here. So thank you for your support. There is more we need to know today, so much more. So let's get to the briefs.
Well, Nintendo is near release of a new feature called Virtual Game Cards, which is meant to make porting games between Switch devices easier and in a similar way to how physical cards can be easily swapped between consoles. The new feature will be available in late April and allows players to migrate games between devices, given that they first connect to each other locally to authenticate. The new feature will also enable players to lend games to other players in their Nintendo family group or on a local Wi-Fi for 14 days.
There you go. That's nice. I think players have been wanting this for a very long time, especially parents that don't want to have to buy the same game for different kids in their family group. And now they can share them. They've just got 14 days to swap back and forth. So
I love
it. Good move, especially on the heels of a Switch 2 coming down the pipeline.
Absolutely. And I kind of just makes me nostalgic for the days where you would like rent a cartridge from Blockbuster when they existed, and or even just like literally just handing a plastic cartridge over to a friend and switching one over. I love this. There's so many layers to this. Good for consumers and good for nostalgia.
Indeed. American support for the TikTok ban appears to be losing steam, according to a survey of more than 5,000 U.S. adults by Pew Research Center. 34% of respondents support the ban. That's down from 50% in a similar study by Pew in 2023. 32% oppose the ban now, compared to 22% in 2023. So more people opposing it. Those drops were consistent across party lines as well. Perhaps unsurprisingly, non-users of TikTok were 4 times as likely to support the ban than non-users. TikTok faces an April 19th deadline, but many expect the deadline to get an extension by the U.S. president if a buyer for the app isn't secured in time.
Well, the Vivaldi browser now integrates Proton VPN for free when logged into a Vivaldi account. So desktop users will have the option of switching between 5 randomly selected countries, and speed will be throttled to the medium setting. Though users can upgrade to a paid Proton VPN account for $10 a month to remove those limitations. Vivaldi hopes to add free VPN support to its mobile browser sometime in the future.
Yay. But I can't help it. I always feel a little weird about a free VPN, even though I love that they exist, but I'm always like, okay, yeah, but like, how is it free? Just tell me how it's
right. Free. What am I actually paying? Or what is the actual cost rather?
Exactly. There's cost in there somewhere. What is it? In the 2 days since OpenAI introduced its image generation update to ChatGPT 4o, social media has been inundated, maybe you've seen it, with meme content fashioned after all sorts of styles, including a large influx of art resembling the style of Studio Ghibli. It has prompted fresh debate around the lack of copyright protection as it relates to an artist's style. OpenAI told TechCrunch that it will not replicate, quote, the style of individual living artists, but is capable of replicating, quote, broader studio styles. And that kind of explains why we're seeing so many, in the style of Studio Ghibli and other things. But I was playing around with it this morning. You can get it to do way more than I think you've been able to with most of these models in the past. It's pretty interesting.
I kind of get what they're trying to say, but I still feel like there's something to be said about, and I get individual, they're making a distinction between individual artists and like a studio style. But if this is not saying Art Deco or I don't know, like a 50s sitcom kind of style. This is like a very specific studio with a very distinctive style that is still making cut. Like I don't know,
I think copyright law is going to get interesting as these court battles, find their kind of destination and where they settle. It's going to be really interesting in the next couple of years. We're going to see, either it's going to reinforce what already exists and it's business as usual, or it will really change things. And who knows how that's going to go.
New trip planning features are rolling out across Google Search, Maps, and Gemini on mobile and desktop. AI overviews now offer trip itinerary planning capabilities with direct export to Docs, Gmail, and Maps. Google is also adding hotel price tracking to its alerts feature, joining flight price tracking capability. Maps will also be able to analyze your screenshots for destinations that you've saved, then can be identified and added to a list for planning a future trip.
Google's saying, you need to get out more.
Let me help you.
You know what? You're right, Google. I do need to get out more.
You know what? Stop staring at pictures of Bali. Just plan that trip to Bali. Let me help you.
Here, yes, I will. I can't click the buy button. You're going to have to do that, but I'll get you close. Oracle maintains no breach involving its cloud federated SOO login servers has occurred, while a threat actor named Rose87168 claims to have stolen 6 million records, including encrypted SSO and LDAP passwords. The threat actor also listed 140,621 impacted domains in the incident. Researchers have confirmed the authenticity of the leaked data samples with impacted companies, while the hacker has provided proof of access by uploading a file to Oracle's server. Oracle still kind of mum on this, but it kind of looked like it probably happened.
Well, NVIDIA has launched G-Assist, an experimental AI chatbot designed for gamers, which runs locally on GPUs instead of relying on cloud servers. It is capable of optimizing system and game settings like GPU overclocking and making peripheral lighting adjustments, as well as monitoring performance all through voice and text commands. It currently requires an RTX 3040 or 50 series GPU with a minimum of 12 gigabytes of VRAM.
Yeah. That's something that I actually really like about the direction of AI right now and AI chatbots with control over system settings. Because it's like, I hate diving into system settings to like try and find the one page that does the thing that I'm looking for. Like, I want to ask for the thing that I need to be done and have it be done. That's a world I could live in.
I like that. And with the convenience of voice and text commands, I've always been scared of GPU overclocking because I don't want to melt my...
You don't want to go there?
Yeah, I don't want to go there. But if an AI did it, it can be like, okay, girl, you need to slow down a little bit. Let's turn that down. But I'll turn the lights up on for you so you can feel like I'm moving really fast with this peripheral lighting. I'm all for this. I told you, this is like a great use case for AI assistants, 100%.
Love it. Instacart has a new way for users to make money while shopping. StoreView empowers Instacart users to record video of store shelves one aisle at a time to keep tabs on stock and availability inside of the app. Instacart's predictive models will use the video data to predict when a product might be restocked with verification to follow. Expect the new feature to roll out to select retailers in the coming weeks and more broadly in the US and Canada throughout 2025.
Oh man, I needed this like 3 weeks ago because of all the egg and chicken problems we've been having. There's literally no chicken on the shelves. So thank you, Instacart. Well, those are the essentials for today. Let's dive a little deeper in the ongoing stories and follow up.
You may have thought because Tom is traveling that you weren't going to hear from him for a couple of weeks, but you are wrong. Have you ever wondered how you're able to send information over all the wires that connect your devices? Well, it turns out it's because of our love of animals, and Tom has why that is.
Johann Winkler believed animals had souls. If he didn't, you might not be able to plug in a keyboard or charge a phone. Hear me out. Winkler was born in 1703 in what is now Poland. At the time, it was part of the Habsburg monarchy of Austria. But he made his name in Leipzig, Saxony, where starting in 1731, he taught philosophy at St. Thomas School. It's one of the oldest schools in the world. And he worked there with its musical director. Some of you may have heard of him, Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach. In fact, Winkler even wrote the libretto for one of Bach's 1732 cantatas. Suffice to say, Winkler was a thinker. He wrote a series of essays and eventually a whole textbook arguing that animals have intelligence and possess souls, and therefore humans should not be permitted to torment them. This is in the 1700s, right? So what does this have to do with your USB charger? Winkler was also one of many people at the time who experimented with something called a Leyden jar battery, Leyden. It was originally just a jar half filled with water with a metal spike going through a lid made of something non-conductive like cork. It could collect electric charge so you could use it later. Now, mind you, electricity is a toy. It's not what it is now. At this point, people just play around with it. And before the Leyden jar, you could only get electricity by rubbing two things together like wool or rubber. But now you could do that and store it. So when you rubbed your wool together, the electricity just didn't dissipate. You could store it in the jar. Basically, the Leyden jar was the iPhone of 1744. Anybody with an ounce of curiosity wanted to play with one, and Winkler was no exception. The problem was to get the electricity out of the bottle, you had to use your skin. And like any early adopter, Winkler was like, I bet I can find a workaround to that. After a fever, 2 bloody noses, and convincing his wife to try it, after which she became so weak she could barely walk, he decided, maybe I'll try another way. So he started looking around to see what other folks were doing, and he read that somebody in Berlin had used a bird to conduct the electricity out of the jar. But that had caused the bird much pain, and Winkler was not about to inflict harm on an animal in place of himself, or apparently his wife. So he decided, I will figure something else out. And he hit on it. Winkler used a piece of metal and an iron chain that wrapped around the jar. When the electricity went into the jar, it came out through the chain, onto the metal, and then transmitted sparks in a line, like lightning. Apparently it could be seen up to 50 yards away. So a little light show on top of it. The significance, though, was the amount of electricity and the removal of a human or bird from the process. He kept at it, improving it, using a 15-meter chain and the Pless River to complete the circuit. And he eventually expanded that to 5 jars connected by the chains to create one of the earliest reproducible electrostatic batteries. But it was the links and the ability to connect the jars that eventually led to the use of metal wires. So how do we get from electricity running through wires to me being able to plug in my keyboard to my computer? Okay, for that, we're going to have to jump 100 years later than Winkler. Britain's William Cooke and Charles Wheatstone developed the first commercial telegraph. They demonstrated it on the London and Birmingham Railway. It had a complex system of needles that were moved by electromagnetic coils to point to letters on a board, right? So the signal would come in and based on the electromagnetism, point to a W and then an H and then a Y. But that was a lot of wires. It would be much cheaper, and telegraphs could be stretched over much longer spaces if you could just use one wire instead of using a bunch of different wires for different letters. Enter into our story Samuel Morse, an artist, returning to the United States by ship from Europe when he met a man who knew all about electromagnets. You know, these ships take a long time, so you end up talking to people, and Morse got so taken by the technology of electromagnetism that he set aside his painting and developed a single-wire telegraph system. He used the on-again, off-again nature of electricity to basically create a way to do a single-wire system of communication. He caused an indentation to be made on paper when the electricity was on, and then, of course, there was a gap when it was off. Morse's original version only did numbers, but it was expanded later to do letters as well. But Morse's original version is more than enough for data transmission. Computers only need 2 numbers, a 1 and a 0. The on and off nature of electricity is perfect for that. A device just needs to be able to send current over the wire at 2 distinct voltages. So let's just pick 2, 5 volts and 0 volts, right? Amp it up to 5, not amp it, but you get what I mean. 5 volts, 0 volts, 5 volts, 0 volts. The device receiving the current just needs to know which of those is a 1 and which is a 0. The rest is a matter of how fast you can vary those pulses and how sensitive you can read them. That would be your communication protocol. Early in computing, you just set your device up to communicate with another device by building them together so they shared a communication protocol. They knew which one was 1 and which one was 0, whether it was 5 volts or 7 volts or whatever. And that was fine when the world had maybe a dozen computers, but eventually people wanted to be able to add things like displays and printers without having to have them all built by the same company or built at the same time. So device makers started to make ways to connect various kinds of devices. RS-232 is one of the oldest. It was introduced in 1960 for teletypewriters, but quickly started to be used for electronic terminals. So it was always stretched beyond its original purpose. Eventually, people created other protocols that needed other kinds of ports and cables. There was the PS2 connector that was used for mice and keyboards. There was the VGA display connector for displays, and there are a bunch of others. Well, people at the founding companies of the USB Implementers Forum, or USBIF, got together in 1994 to fix that mess and make it easier to plug things into computers and cheaper to make the computers because you didn't need a separate port for every single peripheral somebody might want to connect. The USB 1.0 specification was originally released in 1996. That helped make it easy to connect things with one universal port and one wire. Samuel Morse would be so proud. Now, you may have heard of Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt is an alternate developed by Apple and Intel, which now uses the same connector as USB, but can carry more data. It's basically got a faster way to turn those pulses on and off and detect them. There's also HDMI, which is built specifically to transmit uncompressed video in sync with audio. All of these work differently, but the differences are all in how those ones and zeros are transmitted by pulses of electricity. So the next time you see a happy little bird bouncing around on the grass, spare a thought for Johann Winkler and how his empathy for that bird led to you being able to charge your phone and listen to that podcast or watch that show on TV or maybe take a photo of that little bouncing bird.
If you have feedback about anything that gets brought up on the show, get in touch with us on the socials at DTNS Show on X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Mastodon at mastodon.social. For TikTok and YouTube, you can find us at Daily Tech News Show.
We end every episode of DTNS with some shared wisdom. Thank you for sending in some shared wisdom. Sylvain Rakikot, you're helping us understand today.
Where would you put AI as it stands today? Next week will possibly already be different. I think we're still in transit between dissolution and enlightenment, as we still have high expectations of what it can bring us, while some already figured out how to use the current versions.
Yeah, I've thought about this a little bit, and I think you're right. It's like AI has promised a lot in a very short amount of time. We've seen a lot of progress, yet it really just depends on who you ask, right? Where do they stand? Are they in this point, this POV of disillusionment where they're looking at where AI has come and it's like, well, you know what? You've made a lot of promises. You're not quite delivering on them. Like, I don't care that I can fashion my, profile photo into the style of Studio Ghibli. Like, give me something that's actually useful. And then you've got people on the other extreme that are like, oh my goodness, like, think about doing this like 5 or 10 years ago with the technology that we had then. Like, this is amazing. It's a really interesting moment to be in when it comes to AI. It's certainly why I personally like following it. I kind of sit right in the middle, but also feel pretty strongly that like, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think my ultimate thing is like, how do you find a way to work with it instead of against it? And so that's kind of my perspective. I don't know how you feel about it, Huyen.
Honestly, just about the same.
Work with, not against. You might just be a little happier if you spend your life working with instead of against. That's all I'm going to say about that. Thanks to Tom Merritt. Thanks to Sylvain for contributing to today's show. Thank you for being along for Daily Tech News Show. The show is made possible by our patrons on patreon.com/DTNS. DTNS has a live version, of course, called DTNS Live. You can catch that on YouTube and Twitch. And you can find details about that and so much more at dailytechnewsshow.com. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
The DTNS family of podcasts, helping each other understand.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.